A big hello and a very warm welcome to Brand Equity with me, Sonali Krishna. Now, the FMCG space has witnessed a lot of headwinds in 2024. But was this unique to just India? Or could the same patterns be mapped across Asia and the rest of the world? Well, to answer just that and do a deep dive into consumer behavior and sentiment across markets, I'm joined by Guillaume Bacuvier, the CEO of Kantar World Panel, which is the consumer panel market research division of course, Kantar. Thank you so much, Guillaume. I hope I've got your pronunciation right. I know it's French, but I've tried my level best.
It's all right. No, don't worry. It's pretty good.
Well, I know, Guillaume, that you've been leading the Kantar's World Panel division since 2021, which is like a $300 million business. And I believe you're known for your expertise in technology and advanced data analytics. And, you drive insights from consumer behavior data for the majority of the top 100 global FMCG manufacturers and retailers. So really, it's our lucky day that you're joining us virtually, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
So my first question really is, given that, you have your pulse on different regions, what I really want to address right on top is how the FMCG segment has performed across regions. Would you say there has been a commonality of sorts in terms of why that sector was a bit dim in its outlook for 2024? And was consumer sentiment, dimming across the globe? Or are these only regional triggers that we saw?
Sure. I mean, yes, there's been a great degree of consistency globally on the way the consumer goods industry has evolved in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, generally, as a rule of thumb, one thing about CPG as an industry is it's by and large representative of macroeconomic trends, right? That these are must-buy purchases for households. They have to eat, they have to take care of themselves, and the level of growth and the level of spend really reflects macroeconomic trends. Both in terms of consumption, GDP growth, et cetera, et cetera. What's been interesting in the last 3-4 years is obviously there's been 2 or 3 meaningful macroeconomic disruptions that have affected the CPG industry. First, there's been obviously the COVID period, the lockdown period, which in many cases has actually had a mostly positive effect on the consumer goods industry, because as people spend more time at home, they ended up typically consuming more household products. And so the consumer goods industry for a period of time benefited from that, at least in some categories. So that was a first tailwind for a period of time. And then after that, because of mostly global events, the war in Ukraine and various other effects, and getting out of the COVID period as well, generally a global trend towards more price inflation, increase in the price of household goods all over the world, including in Asia, including in India. And by and large, that was, again, a unique and rather beneficial period for the consumer goods industry in the sense that in nominal terms, they took advantage of that inflation to take price, as we say, and saw revenue growth mostly coming from the fact that they were increasing their prices in a significant way. And so that has carried them for a while. And in a way, 2024 was a bit of a difficult year because they got out of all that period. For one, obviously, COVID was by that point way behind us. But also this period of inflation that carried their growth as they were increasing prices was also stopping. And also, they've probably reached a point in many cases where the price increases that took place got to a point where most consumers could not afford to buy and had to downgrade, buy cheaper brands, in some cases buy retailer private label. And the industry as a result is at a bit of crossroads and cannot rely on the same growth drivers as they have in the last 2 or 3 years. This is a bit of a pivotal year in this respect.
But just to talk to you about the Indian market, and if what I'm looking from you is really some insight where you can map what's happening in India and tell me that it's an aberration market, or are there a few markets that's behaved like India, and how are the other markets, if you juxtapose the behavior of other markets versus India, how those trends have been. So in India, for instance, after speaking to a large number of CPG companies, the heads of CPG companies, it is very clear that 2024, even large mass market soap companies, biscuit companies which is essentially catering to the large belly of India, have all suffered a degrowth. I mean, their growth rates were not as handsome as they were, let's say, in previous years. Now, if that happens in a market like India, where you're struggling to sell basic soap and biscuits and tea leaves, then that's a real concern and really telling of where the economy stands today. So I'm not really talking about the premium customer or even, let's say, above the belly. I'm talking about mass products here which have suffered in 2024, signaling a cause of concern. Of course, inflation, a big concern, as you pointed out, but also wage earners need more money in their hands was a very big insight, because, general revenue in the hands of the customer has not increased. It's in fact shrinking, while you have inflation and you have rents, you have other items, which are kind of going up, and which is why that kind of balancing act. My point is, are there other regions that have behaved similarly?
I would say by and large, yes. This is a recurring theme, which is really what often happens when you're at the tail end of an inflationary period. Prices have gone up. In many cases, wages and income for consumers have not kind of aligned with that.
I have to stop you. If you can give me specific examples, right? Because this I know. I think my viewers also know this. I'm more interested in which regions and the different insights you can give me for other markets.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this statement applies to pretty much every region in the world with different dynamics. I can pick out, for the sake, in most European countries, same situation, very high levels of price inflation for consumer goods in the last years, typically double-digit growth in the cost of day-to-day goods, and certainly wage increases have not aligned with that, but partly because both private companies and government have tried to constrain wage inflation to avoid this perpetuating inflationary trend. So consumers are pinched, right? And to your point as well, in many countries as well, most countries in Europe, North America, housing cost as well has been increasing at a very rapid clip. So definitely a pinch. And therefore, the reaction of many consumers has been to rethink the way they spend their household budget and the products that they buy to adjust for that. What does that mean in practice? Sometimes it means indeed a reduction in volume, so buying less consumer products, but also trading down. And that means buying cheaper brands, going less premium. Not so much in India, but in other parts of the world, the big winners of that have been the private labels of organized retail. So the retailers have their own brands that they sell at a cheaper price, and people will move from the branded premium product to these private label products. So consumers adjust because, in a way, as we said, they need to eat, they need to look after themselves, so they still have to buy these products. But if they have less budget to do it, they'll just change the mix of products that they buy. They might reduce the frequency of purchase as well in order to adjust to this kind of budget pinch. So you see that in Europe, you see that in North America. It explains also in some cases some of the kind of political trends that we're seeing with a degree of frustration in the general population, is because they feel like they quite can't make ends meet given the recent pricing trends that we've observed in the last years. It's an understandable situation.
Which categories, in your opinion, in the CPG space were actually doing better than the rest?
Well, I think what we're seeing is somewhat of a divergence in categories and in the market, in the sense that some day-to-day categories are actually commoditizing and going down market, with consumers actually favoring and increasingly value brands and private labels, whilst indulging themselves in some categories and actually going a bit more up market. Typically, because of more broader societal trends, personal care and beauty are categories that still tend to benefit because there's a general trend towards customization in those categories. Whilst in others, people basically decide that they don't actually need to ban, a branded pack of rice, and they'll go either bulk or buy a private label because that's not a very high consideration good or a status good in any way. So you see a growing divergence in markets. It's a general trend that increasingly in many consumer markets, scattered categories, there's no middle market. You're either premium, you have a high desirability brand and people are willing to pay premium for what you do, or you're a value brand and you compete on price. And the losers are all the brands and companies that kind of are stuck in the middle. And I would say that probably applies to India as well, from what I've heard and seen.
Can you give me any specific data, Guillaume? Because, while this is all lovely in terms of, on a macro level, which is true for almost every region in the world, is there anything specific you can tell me in terms of insights, which is regional insights or region-specific insights that would make sense to my CXO audience who's watching you?
Are you saying specifically with regards to India or more broadly?
No, India, I think we are pretty well versed with. It's our market. I'm really looking at India versus the rest of the world. So if you could give me specific data on, let's say, how Asia is behaving versus Europe, versus the Americas, versus South America, that might give me more insights and of course would be more valuable to my viewers.
I mean, generally, Asia as a region, in relative terms to the world, is still seen as one of the growth areas for global CPG companies. You hear that a lot in recent interviews from whether it's the head of Unilever or others, because these are regions that are, relatively speaking, seeing faster growth, where part of the population is entering the consumer society. So that's driving more growth. They're less mature. And so most companies, including companies that are originally more historically US or Europe-based, are betting a lot on Asia generally as a country. And if we look at the growth rates of consumer goods in that part of the world, it is relatively higher than would be in Europe or the US. We're talking in Asia, typically in most countries between 4 to 8% growth year on year in total market size and value. You certainly wouldn't see those kinds of growth in European countries. So there is that. There is also in Asia a general trend towards an ever-growing premium segment in many countries that almost behaves differently from the rest of the country. We see that in India too. So a mass market that is still largely based on offline purchases in traditional type retail, whilst a subsegment of the population operates completely differently. That's a trend we see across all Asian markets, and it's quite consistent. And therefore, that forces as well CPG companies to almost approach the market with 2 or 3 very different strategies, like they're running 2 or 3 different companies in parallel. And again, that's something you could apply to India as well.
A lot of people are talking about getting AI and this whole AI transformation into their businesses. Can you explain to me how you tangibly see this making a difference, whether it be via consumer engagement or it be on the business side where they just make their operations a lot more efficient?
Sure. I mean, if I speak about the business we are in, which is really a business about collecting and manipulating information, and inherently that's what market insights and market research is about. Needless to say, for us, AI is deeply transformational. In our case, it operates at 2 levels. It's transformational in the way we collect information from consumers, like the raw material by which market research operates, which is being profoundly transformed by AI and technology in general. 10, 15 years ago, the way you would try to understand consumers is questionnaires, often done face-to-face. And increasingly, we're relying on technology, we're relying on apps, we're relying on automated collection. We are asking consumers to take pictures of the products they buy and they eat as a way to collect data about their behavior. And before, that was impossible to do because the technology and the AI wasn't there to make sense of all this information. Now we can do this reliably at a massive scale, which means that the amount of information, granular information we have about consumers is exploding. And that's profoundly transforming the way we as a market research company operates. That's a first transformation. Our interaction with consumers, indeed, as you said, very different, profoundly transformed in a way that's mostly an opportunity more than a threat. And then there's the second part of what we do, which is once we have all that data, our job is to make sense of it, draw insights from it that can guide the decisions of consumer goods company. Again, because of the recent developments in AI, interpretation of data, even in a very sophisticated way, drawing deep insights from very large amounts of transformation is something that's being profoundly transformed. In the past, it was mostly done by highly skilled, very trained professionals that knew how to make sense of data. Now there are a lot of shortcuts towards automating all of that interpretation. Probably not 100%. You still need a degree of high-touch human expertise that provides insights and advice, but a good part of it can be automated, and also in the process, not just automated, but processed at a much greater speed. So that's the other big opportunity for us is typically today when we are asked to run a complex piece of market research for one of these big consumer goods companies, historically time frame to come up with a good conclusion would have been weeks, if not months sometimes, to both collect and make sense of the data. Now we see a path towards doing the same kind of work in a matter of days because of the acceleration that AI provides for us. So deeply profound for sure, and transforming both the speed and the granularity and the accuracy of the results we provide. Where that takes us in the end, what's the end game? Not quite sure yet, because obviously with every week that passes, these technologies keep on changing and innovating. But we are deeply convinced that this is going to completely transform our industry. And in a way, again, that I see largely as a positive.
Well, the jury is out on that. We'll have to wait and watch. At the moment, I don't think AI, apart from being spoken about, has made any difference to the consumer end. You make one call to any customer care service, you're first, you're being welcomed by a robot who tells you to press a number of buttons, and that process takes 5 to 7 minutes. At the end of it, your query might not be responded to because it's not in their set of questions, right? It's not in their consideration list. So right now, it's a pretty frustrating, I would say, experience from a consumer standpoint. So, for customers and general global conferences at Cannes and what you have, talking about how AI is going to transform the world, I think they need to do a little bit more of MR with maybe companies like yourselves and Nielsen, and, kind of look at what that customer experience really is about. Because finally, if it's about me, the customer, then you need to keep me focused and not only look at your customer efficiency, your operational efficiency rather.
Sure,
which would be my feedback to general companies who are adopting AI. Having said that, you've come on an India visit, and I believe you've been speaking to a lot of clients. What's the pulse you're getting? What are Indian clients telling you?
Multiple things. I mean, one, I mean, in a sense, I think there's an appreciation of the size and scale of the country, and therefore the long-term potential of the Indian economy. And I share that. I mean, the way we look at India is, it is already a large and important country for us in our international portfolio, where we're only scratching the surface. That's, I think, is one thing. It's still in some ways early days. What we've been hearing from clients in the last days where I've been around is 2 or 3 big themes. One is indeed growing divergence in behavior and growth between different segments of the Indian population. A particular interest in our case in making better sense and building a better understanding of the upper tranches of the economic ladder, if you will, which clearly is growing at this point faster than the rest of the households in India. So you've got the higher socioeconomic class that are seeing higher growth represent a disproportionate share of the consumer market as well, and they're keen to spend more time understanding that part of the population better. And also probably that the part of the, indeed, as you said, the part of the Indian society or economy that's possibly being the most challenged is probably the middle class, the kind of mid-market urban Indian is where we see the biggest struggles. The rural population is still growing and evolving. And so you've got growing divergence between a top of the society that's growing quite fast, the lower part that is seeing green shoots, and the middle being squeezed. And that's a bit, they're thinking about how they adjust their product portfolio to that new reality. How do they manage all their brands? How do they manage packaging, pricing in an Indian market that's changing very fast? And the challenge as well about India is it's changing very fast, and there's not necessarily a ton of great up-to-date data about the country at large, good quality up-to-date statistics. So keeping track of how the country is changing is not in itself simple, which I guess is why services like the ones we provide do matter to a lot of companies, because we're one of the few kind of pulses or surveys into how Indian society is changing. Please.
How do you think you've kind of upped your own game, given all the new tech aids you have? For a market as complex and as diverse as this one, why do you say, I mean, how have you upped your game to tell the Indian companies that I can actually help you better because I've upped my game?
Sure. I mean, we have constantly throughout the years, had to adjust the way we operate and manage our consumer panel, and there's a lot more coming in the coming years. To your point, especially adjusting to the way the market itself is evolving. We are pretty good at this point at measuring the mass market, and one of the strengths of our business in India is that we do measure consumption behavior in the entire country, both in rural areas and in urban areas. That's our strength. When areas
how? The question is how?
Well, but just
How
by making sure that we have our panel in India is the largest we have in the world. So we have recruited more than 80,000.
But that would be obvious. We are the most populous country in the world, so you have to have the largest panel here.
So the first one is having scale, making sure also that you have good geographic and socioeconomic distribution, so that you can measure and get data from different parts of the country, both in terms of income classes and geographic location. The one area that we want to strengthen is the premium segment, which we do not measure well enough. And as I said, is a source of major interest from companies. One, because it represents a large share of consumption. Also because their behavior is very different. That's where you see all the innovation in online commerce, quick commerce, direct delivery, great amounts of change, new innovative brands. So that particular segment of India requires a special focus, and that's where we're betting a lot of our own investment. How do we better measure the behavior of those households?
So basically what I'm getting from you, Guillaume, is that you're saying the world now is behaving in a homogeneous manner. There are no distinct, differences between regions and geographies. Am I fair to assume that?
Yes, I would probably say yes and no, in the sense that there are a lot of common trends, again, that we've observed that have driven common behaviors across countries. As I said, in the way consumer society is stratifying these divergence in behaviors across the spectrum of socioeconomic classes, the role that recent macroeconomic events have had across the world, inflation, COVID, that has kind of driven a sense of consistency. At the same time, local tastes, local preferences, cultural preferences, they are very different. The product, in every country, we also manage, in a sense, a very large dictionary of all the consumer products in that country. That's also part of what we have to do. The dictionary of consumer products in India is completely different, even to the one we'll have in another Asian country. So it's yes and no, in the sense that there are some behaviors and trends that are very similar, but tastes are partly driven by sometimes long-standing cultural practices are very different. And that's why also we have to run panels in every country, and we can't apply whatever we're observing, in Vietnam or France to what's going to happen in India. You have to do it locally, because it's the products and what people consume is going to be quite different.
Given your bird's eye view, of different regions, given all the data and the insights you're getting from different countries and at a region level, what's your outlook for 2025?
Well, again, I think if we ignore the possible disruptions brought by macroeconomic and macropolitical events.
No, let's not ignore it. It's part of our reality. Let's embrace it.
Well, in the sense, it's not ignored, but it's probably difficult to predict what the final outcome is going to be because of these escalating tariff discussions. If you set that aside, I think more generally, before all of that, I would just say somewhat the world is a bit reverting to norm. We were getting out of this inflation period. Consumers were adjusting to that. We had less kind of big events coming up. And so now, obviously, if what's been initiated in the US through the Trump administration does create a global widespread sort of trade war, we might be up for another crisis, right? And indeed, if that does create inflation, we might start having another inflationary wave just when we thought we were out of the previous one. Obviously, if that does happen, if we see a resurgence in inflation, that's going to have, again, a widespread effect on consumer behavior across the world. And at a point as well where the breathing space from a financial standpoint of many households across the world is already quite small. So how consumers would adjust to the next wave of inflation is a big question. And what choices, trade-offs would they make in the purchase decisions that they make every day is going to be key. And I'm not quite sure yet. I mean, we'll have to find out. In a way, I like to say these kind of situations are good news for a business like ours, because a business of market research lives on uncertainty and volatility. If things were stable all the time, our clients wouldn't need our services that often. When there's these big shocks, obviously they're very keen to understand how that changes consumer behavior. So we'll find out. First, we need to understand whether indeed the recent events do translate into a new big inflationary trend, because that would be for sure a big deal. And indeed probably would suggest, therefore, a pretty negative outlook, if we're honest.
Wow. So basically, all in all, in a crux 2025, also quite depressing. going forward?
I mean, the next months are going to really be determinant to see which direction we're taking. Are we reverting back to the norm, or are we up again for another crisis period spurred by global events? Hard to say at this point, because every week, every day almost, the news go one way or the other. So it's hard to kind of predict at this point, I would say.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your insights. Hopefully, we can both pray. I mean, of course, it's advantage you if you have, a negative 2025. But for other businesses, we pray that if we hit the roads of recovery pretty soon. And thank you very much, and hope you enjoy your India stay.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Sonali. See you very soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.